Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess,
Hello and welcome
Alicia
to the Business
Butler
Infrastructure
Pierre.
Show, where we share tips and resources to help you cure back office blues. I'm your hostess, Alicia Butler Pierre, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by Jodi Daniels. Jodi is founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a data privacy consultancy helping companies create privacy programs, provide operational support to achieve GDPR or CCPA compliance, and serves as a fractional privacy officer. She was previously Senior Vice President of Privacy Compliance at Bank of America and created the privacy program at Cox Automotive. Jodi has more than 20 years of corporate experience in finance, strategy, online advertising, and privacy at firms like Deloitte, The Home Depot, Cox Enterprises, and Bank of America. Wow. Listening to those big names, you may be thinking that data privacy and compliance simply doesn't apply to you as a small business owner, but let me assure you that is not the case. Almost every day, it seems, I see some type of an article about security breaches being on the rise in smaller companies. And Jodi, I'm sure, is going to debunk a lot of these myths that we as small business owners may have when it comes to data privacy. Specifically, she's going to share with us the one thing we need to know about data privacy. And this is a conversation I've been longing to have with Jodi for quite some time now. So without any further ado, Jodi, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm well, and thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I'm definitely delighted to have you. Before we get into data privacy, can you first tell us a little bit more about what you do at Red Clover Advisors? I love that name, by the way.
Thank you. I'm glad that you like it. So we help companies, predominantly small and medium businesses, who often don't have anyone really dedicated to privacy. We help them comply with various privacy laws, and I know we'll get into them, namely GDPR, that just celebrated its first birthday this past May, the big EU privacy law, the upcoming new California privacy law, and then my favorite is sort of where there is no law, helping companies think through what they should and shouldn't be doing with data, as well as there's a myriad of other US privacy laws. And we have a bit of a specialty in the marketing space, so really helping companies think through, how should I send that email? Should I send that email? What data should I use? Should I keep it? All of those types of questions.
And that's so important. I'm sure that in and of itself, we could go on for an hour easily just talking about that.
Indeed, we could.
Now, before we get directly into data privacy, I kind of feel like we need some more contextual information to kind of set us up for the conversation around data privacy. Starting with, can you first tell us what GDPR is as well as CCPA?
Yes, I love to decode acronyms. So GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it is the big EU privacy law that went into effect May 25th, 2018. And why it matters to those listening here in the United States is because it really affects companies globally, not just the EU, nor just the United States, but any company around the globe that meets a variety of criteria underneath GDPR. And very simply said, if you obviously have a physical location and operate in the EU, you're certainly in scope. If you don't, and maybe you're an online business and you're serving EU customers, maybe you're an e-commerce business, or maybe you're even just a solo blogger and you have readers and customers from the EU, you're also in scope. It's all about offering goods and services or monitoring the behavior, which you can easily do with a lot of the digital tracking technologies that we have today. And the other place where companies often get sort of in scope for GDPR is they might be, in GDPR terms, a processor in simple words. They're a vendor, they're a service provider, they're doing something for a company. And in doing that, they might have personal data. A payroll provider is a great example. Imagine I'm a payroll provider and I'm processing my UK employees' data. I might be in the United States as the payroll company, but I'm processing the UK employees' data. The company who hired me needs to make sure that I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing and that all of my vendors are also compliant with GDPR. So kind of by default, me, the payroll provider, will have to adhere to GDPR.
How on earth? Well, you know what? I'll put a pin in that when we get to actual people, processes, and tools. I definitely want to know how we actually find out about GDPR and how to specifically apply it to what we may have going on in our respective companies. But let's put a pin in that for now and hop over to CCPA.
Right, CCPA. I was so excited about GDPR. I forgot about the second part of the question. So CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act. That was passed last June 2018, really on the heels of Facebook Cambridge Analytica. And it goes into effect January 2020. It is the first state privacy law of its kind, and it offers individuals a lot of the individual rights like GDPR does, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit more deep into that. The heart of CCPA is very much around enhanced notice, meaning if a company is going to do something with information, I have to really disclose very clearly what it is that I'm doing. And we have privacy notice laws. In fact, California was the first state to also do that. But this takes it further and deeper. Plus, it offers these individual rights. And a really big piece is the sale of data. I, as a customer, have the opportunity to opt out of the sale of my data. And that's really throwing a monkey wrench into a lot of companies' businesses. And if you think about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica case, you see why there's such an emphasis on the ability to opt out of the sale of data. That's what that whole case was kind of about. But it's very important for anyone listening to realize if you don't sell data, that does not mean you're out of scope for this California Act. It's just a component of it. I talk to a lot of people and they think, oh, I don't sell any data, I'm all good. And I always have to remind them that is not true. You just don't have to worry about that part.
Okay. Now, when you and I met, we were both speaking at a Small Business Matters conference, and I was so struck by your presentation. Particularly, there was a slide that you had, and I think it was the image of a fingerprint or maybe a thumbprint, and it had all of these different types of data typed out, throughout that fingerprint image. And that, it just really resonated with me, Jody.
I'm so glad, yay!
Yeah, I would love, if I would love to be able to put a copy of that on the website, if that's okay with you, and we can talk about that later. But can you also, before again we get right into the nuts and bolts of data privacy, can you also talk to us about the different types of data? Because you touched on something in describing CCPA when you said that, just because we may not necessarily be selling data doesn't mean that CCPA doesn't apply to our businesses. So I think for a lot of us as small business owners, we also think, well, I don't sell data. I don't even really have data. So yes, I have maybe some contact information for my customers and my clients, but that's about it. But there's so many different types of data. Can you kind of talk through that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. And let me start actually with the contact data. So all that contact data is absolutely personal data. California calls it personal information. GDPR calls it personal data. You can pick your flavor. But all that contact information is in scope. And under both laws, there's a hearty emphasis on the protection of data. So trying to prevent a security breach. If you have 10,000 people's customer data, you're responsible for that. If you have 100,000 people's contact information and it leaks out, you're responsible for that. But personal data, as you mentioned, it expands beyond what most people think of it. And when I talk to people, people think privacy equals security. That is a component, not the only part. And they think it's just the contact information and financial information or health information. And that's also a part, but not all of it. All, especially under GDPR, visa information, passport, and true for CCPA as well. But what's happened is under these laws, personal data's definition has expanded beyond kind of the typical legal definition from a data breach. And so that's where the disconnect has been a little bit. Data breach laws have focused very much on a certain subset of data, but privacy is about also the use and collection of data. And in today's society where we're tracking everything and creating digital footprints and speaking to Internet of Things, Alexa devices and Apple Watches and Ring doorbells and, doing so many transactions online, the amount of personal data is significant. That visa information, passport information, financial information, my preferences, you might know my psychographic information, you might know my political, religious, ethnicity, all of that is now considered personal information, as well as all the digital technologies, meaning, let's say you have a Facebook pixel or a Google Analytics pixel. Well, you probably have an IP address that comes with that, and you might have a cookie that's dropped on the computer. That's also considered personal information. And people always say, well, that's anonymous. And I came from that world. I started a behaviorally targeted ad network at autotrader.com before there were even Facebook ads. I lived in that world. And while it's anonymous because it doesn't have your name associated to it or an email address in a lot of situations, but today it might even, because of all the technologies that can interact and talk to each other, you can essentially build a profile, a digital footprint that connects all the dots. And I can figure out that IP address 123 with cookie 456 is Jody. And that's what's happened. And there's been companies who have abused that. And kind of like in kindergarten where the rules are always set for someone who broke them, it's sort of the same thing in all these laws. We're catching up to the companies who have kind of abused the situation and are trying to allow the individual to have knowledge about what's happening, communicate, tell me and be honest, and have some rights, be able to say, well, that's my data. I get to decide if that's okay that you're using it or not. And GDPR has more control over the use of data. CCPA is not as comprehensive as GDPR. It does offer more notice and more choice, but not quite to the same extent as GDPR does.
What is the one thing that we need to know about data privacy?
So you need to know, I can't do one thing.
I know, Jody. I know it's difficult, but
it is. The very first one is and I actually already said it, so I'm going to reiterate it. Privacy is not only security and a data breach protection. So many people, they think privacy, I have to protect my data. And that's absolutely a significant part of it. But privacy is also about the use and collection. As a small business, if someone gives you their data for a transaction, they expect you to use it to deliver the goods or service or send them the information that you signed up for. But they don't necessarily expect you to sell it and to share it and to do whatever else with it unless you told them. So privacy is really beyond just the security. Now that I don't want anyone to think, well, security is not important. It's critical. It's absolutely important. It's just also so much about all of these other pieces. And privacy is here to stay, which was really going to be sort of my second point. We have this big EU law. We're talking about California. There's about 10 other states that have privacy laws that they're considering. And there's, if anyone here does business in Brazil, there's a Brazilian law coming in effect in 2020. There's other countries around the world evaluating and increasing their privacy laws. So if you're listening and you're thinking, I don't like that, I don't think it applies to me, just know it's a growing trend and it's truly here to stay, and customers, whether you're B2B or B2C, care about it today.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how easy it is for a data breach to happen by way of email. In fact, before this interview, I was reading an article in the Atlanta Business Chronicle, and they were interviewing a man, a business owner who has, I think he has like the go-kart experience. I don't remember the name of the company, but he was saying he accidentally clicked on something. He opened an email that appeared to be a legitimate email from his bank. And he filled out some information. He pressed the button, and he said as soon as he pressed the button, it led him to a website. And that's when he realized, oh my gosh, this actually isn't my bank. Thankfully, he was able to contact his bank right away, and they immediately froze all of his accounts. But for those of us who, it's very easy to do, Jody. Especially when you're checking messages on your phone, and you're usually in a hurry of some sort. You're not really paying that much attention, I guess, or that close of attention. And it could be a slight change in the logo. It could be a slight. There's always something to let you know that an email is fraudulent, I guess. But if you are in a hurry, as many of us are, as small business owners, we're all extremely busy. We're trying to get through things very quickly, especially as we're checking our inboxes. And I could see someone accidentally, I can see how it would happen, where you would accidentally open an email and then click on something. And then before you know it, your entire network is down, or it has somehow, some malware has been installed onto your computer, your network, your phone. Um, if we had to try to tie this into business infrastructure and really think about the people, the processes, and the tools that are needed to mitigate against all of this, or to develop, I guess, what you do, which is developing these data privacy programs, where do we even begin in terms of people? Who are the types of people that we would seek out to help us sort through all of this?
Well, you need a variety of different folks. So, there's someone, a privacy consultant, which is what I do. There's security consultants who are very focused on sort of your scenario, that phishing email. From a phishing email perspective, that's really training and making sure that employees know what to look for. Like you had said, is it the logo different? And we're all human. It's hard to be perfect all of the time, but that continuous training is truly important. There's actually a lot of companies that will do kind of phishing scams to train. They're fictitious phishing scams. So there's a variety of those that can help, and then they reveal the results. Look, 80% of you clicked on it, those types of things. Attorneys are also helpful to be able to provide certain legal advice in some of these areas. So it's kind of a cadre depending on your business and how deep you go and the types of data that you collect, I think would warrant one or all of those, or just a fraction of them. If you have a technology platform, you really want to make sure that you have a security consultant really reviewing the technology and the code that you've built to make sure that there aren't flaws and loopholes and areas that can make it easy for a hacker to get in. If you've built a lot of databases, the same might be true. If you're relying on a lot of cloud providers, which myself and a lot of other small businesses are using, it's not that there's no risk of security, but you don't have quite as much in your own fiefdom that you're managing. You've sent it to a Dropbox, or you've sent it to your email service provider. So your world is going to be a little bit tighter. Maybe there you want to make sure you're using an encrypted laptop. You could do a Google search to be able to figure that part out. You don't necessarily need a whole firm to help you encrypt your laptop if you're a really small business. It just kind of all depends on the number of employees, the number of people, and all those types of things. And again, also the extent to where you're operating your business and where your customers are coming from.
One of the things I gained, I would say, I guess, a greater appreciation for when I was visiting your website, there was, in fact, well, I would pull it up right now, but I don't want to get distracted. But it was something to the effect of, we're at a point now in society where people expect privacy. Your customers want to know that they can trust you, and what better way to instill that trust than to let them know how their data will be handled. What are some of the different ways that we can, as small business owners, communicate the different ways that we, or the extent to which we go to actually protect any data that we have collected, not only on our customers, but I would imagine for your staff, your employees, and even vendors that you work with, independent contractors, freelancers. We're talking about customers, but I would imagine that happens, there's that internal data protection that needs to take place as well.
You're absolutely right. And from a GDPR perspective, so anyone listening who has to adhere to that, employees and vendors are in scope. And from a US perspective, employees are a little bit different, and that starts getting into kind of HR law. Though under California, currently as written, employees are in scope. However, there's an amendment to sort of alter the original language. We're going to just have to wait and see until the fall how that plays out. And vendors are certainly in scope. So you're absolutely right. And all people today really expect that companies are going to do right with their data and that they want to be able to trust them. So many companies have honestly violated that trust, that many individuals are a little hesitant these days. They might still use the service. Social media is a great example. 9% of people trust social media with their data. However, there's still billions of people using social media.
Wow, only 9%?
Only 9% trust them.
Wow.
But
oh my gosh.
They provide such a utility, and there's only so many viable alternatives. They still use it. But what I have seen is people are changing their habits on them. They're not necessarily, those who really understand what's happening, they're changing their habits. There's still oodles of people who are downloading the Face app, for example, that sends your data to the app company based in Russia who can use it in any way that they want. That was last week's big news story. But the big thing I think is to stay on top of it, and first to recognize this is a business risk. Just like there's all kinds of other business risks that a small business or really any business has to adhere to, privacy and security is also a business risk that requires the appropriate attention. It really shouldn't be something that's just going to be sloughed off for a variety of reasons. Customers care. If you're a growing business looking for investment, investors, M&A deals, banks are even starting to really probe and have requirements from a privacy and a security standpoint. And when you think about, how you're looking to grow and operate your business, you would want to put that forward. So staying on top of the latest trends, making sure you have the right advisors around you who are going to be knowledgeable to be able to help you relative to your business. As I said before, not every business necessarily will need all three types of advisors. You might need one or two or a combination as you grow in time. But I see a lot of small businesses ignore it and say, well, I'm too small. No one's going to find me. They're not as concerned about the fines. And I can understand that. The likelihood of them getting a fine is much smaller as a much smaller business. However, the likelihood of losing a customer is still really high, because if you violate it, then that's a problem. If you're looking for those investment dollars and an investor, a bank, an M&A, right, any of those, I might turn the other way. And then think about just the company values. Do you really want to choose which law you're going to pay attention to? It's kind of like think about in your daily life. How many people decide to break this law because, well, the likelihood of my getting caught in a fine is small, so I'm just going to keep breaking it anyways. Right? Most people decide I'm going to abide by the law because that's what I should do. So here you have a law and you have what your customers expect. It's not only the law. That customer expectation is really important as well.
In terms of the actual process of going about putting these different data privacy measures in place, Jody, I'm trying to, as I listen to you, I'm trying to think through what are some of the different things that, generically speaking, most small business owners can do right away to start putting some type of data privacy measures in place. And I'm thinking, even something like a statement on their websites that speaks to, hey, this site uses cookies, or maybe this site doesn't use cookies, or this is how we collect information and this is what we do with it. Another thing that came to mind is when people sign up for newsletters, and a lot of times you will automatically receive an email in your inbox that says, hey, just so you'll know, this is what we will never share or sell your email address or your contact information with to a third party. Are those examples, or are those good examples of some things that people can start doing right away to put these data privacy measures in place?
Yeah, so these are great questions. So the very first place to start is literally to just take a list of all the data that you're collecting. What is all the personal data that you have? So think about your business activities. What are you doing in marketing? What is the core of your business? Where is all of that stored? And literally just make a list that says, I'm doing email marketing. I put it in MailChimp. I collect name and email. I use Shopify. I collect these 10 items and it stays in Shopify. I use Salesforce and I collect these 1,000 things and I do whatever. Right? Literally make a long laundry list, and that will help you identify what you collect, where it's stored, why you're using it, and who you're sharing it with. All the pillars of a privacy program and what you need to even write an accurate privacy notice. So you can't write the privacy notice if you have no idea what goes in it, and what goes in it is what I've just said. So the very first place is to start with that data inventory. Then you can start with needing a privacy statement. That is a document that, quite frankly, is required by a variety of states, as well as the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, kind of looks to that as its way of a business not being unfair and deceptive, meaning it disclosed what it is that you're doing. So there's been some cases where the FTC has gone after a company for not having a privacy policy or for having a privacy notice that was wrong. Because it's really the communication vehicle that says, customer, here's what I'm collecting, here's what I'm using, here's why, and here's what I do with it, and here are your choices. So kind of important to have that privacy notice. I also see people very often when you sign up for an email program that think the privacy notice that just says, we care about your privacy, we won't sell it, we don't share it, the end.
Yes.
That's not all you need in the privacy notice. There's a lot more. So it's great. Thank you for telling me that. I also need more. There's just, most of those sites have a Facebook pixel. Most of those sites have a Google Analytics pixel. In fact, those two companies specifically have language that needs to be included in a privacy notice and is often missing from it. And there's a variety of other items that you want to include. So it's really taking that data inventory, getting that privacy notice up there. In privacy notices, people will say, well, but those are those long, boring legal things no one ever reads. And they are long. They can be a little, legal heavy. However, you can make it a little bit more fun and lighthearted. You can also make them more visual with hyperlinks. I'm seeing more sort of summary boxes that can make it more interactive and a really positive user experience. And also, depending on the kind of data you're collecting, I would offer, kind of like in our example, if you sign up for an email, it said, I'm not sharing it or selling it with a third party.
Mm-hmm.
To also be able to say, imagine I'm a small business and I'm collecting health information. I might not want to only rely on my privacy notice. I might want to say, you know what, I need all of this history so I can better serve you. We don't share it or sell it. We maintain your privacy. It's extremely important to us. You can read more about it here. If you kind of think about what it is you're asking people and you explain it to them a bit along the way and you really utilize the customer experience, it could even be in person. If you're maybe you're a coach or a doctor or a consultant or something along those lines, you're collecting all this information. Let me tell you why we're needing all of this. And here's our formal policy that explains it. It creates that sense of trust. And I might be more willing to give more information to you. Or if you're in the e-commerce space and you really want to personalize those messages to make sure that you're selling only kid clothing to me versus, hunting gear. I would never do that. So if you're an outdoor site, please don't ever send me anything around hunting. I'm just going to be really angry at you. I am really interested in maybe the hiking gear and the kayaking gear. If you ask me enough questions and you explain to me why I'm interested in that or why you as a company need it, again, I'm going to be more inclined to share it with you.
Now, before we take a quick break, Jody, I've heard you mention these Facebook pixels. What exactly is that?
So for any time anyone has seen, you've gone shopping online, you go to Facebook and you notice magically the shoes or item you were looking for is being shown to you in your Facebook feed, that is because the website you were on placed a little 1x1 piece of code. It's called a 1x1 pixel. And it's a little code from Facebook that says, mark that computer that says they looked at this item and store this little cookie, so that when they go to Facebook or honestly other sites, but the Facebook pixel works on Facebook, then I can serve an ad. I can retarget them to be able to say, hey, come on back. So it's this little piece of code. Interesting example, I was on Marriott.com last night. And this morning, I guess it had my cookie stored. It knows who I am, my cookie to my email and my login, that I received an email this morning basically trying to remind me to come back to the site to plan my trip that I never planned last night. I just went to the Marriott site, but this morning in my inbox is an email that says come on back. Now, some people might not like that. I know they have that because I've probably saved my login information and I'm okay and they've dropped that cookie. But kind of think about, to some people, that's a little creepy.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Maybe
because
I don't want you to send me that email reminding me to come on back.
Yeah.
Good. But that's what a cookie does.
Your virtual, so cookies are like these things that follow you virtually online or electronically.
Yes. It's like a little, now at the conference, you, and our listeners can appreciate this, but you might remember my story of sort of how I set it all up, which was the digital stalking. Imagine someone you left your home and someone followed you and noted when you went to get your cup of coffee, where you went to drop the kids off at school or at camp, where you went to work, what you had for lunch, which yoga class or gym class you went to, which errand you went to, what car you drove, and followed you all the way home and continued doing that. If you looked behind you, you'd say, why are you stalking me? But that's what we do online. We literally collect every single click of what someone is doing, piece it all together, create a profile, and use it to target them.
Well, I have a really quick story, and we're going over, but it's totally fine because this is so critical, so important to all of us as small business owners, even not just small business owners, but anyone in business, honestly. But I remember a few years ago, my husband he went to an event at a hotel, and he said he was in the lobby and he struck up a conversation with this lady and he complimented her on her dress because he was like, it's really unique dress. It was, the fabric was really nice and it had all of these really cool patterns in it. The very next day, Jody, he goes to his inbox and he gets an email advertising that dress. And it freaked both of us out because we were like, okay, wait, do they have like some type of telepathic pixels now that can literally, it was just so strange and so bizarre.
Yeah, I can always tell when my husband uses my computer because I get all kinds of man shoes in my feed everywhere. It's not a perfect science, but it's sort of the best that has existed to date.
Wow. Well, when we come back, we're going to take a really quick commercial break. And when we come back, I'd like for you to share with us some tools and resources that we can leverage as we start to try to make sense of data privacy and how we can start implementing our own privacy notices and statements in our respective companies.
Sounds great.
Okay. Sarah Rubin is the COO at her family's growing furniture company. All was well until a malicious virus attacked their network, virtually wiping out a year's worth of important customer data needed to process orders and track invoicing. Find out how she leveraged business infrastructure to develop a records management system to solve the issue and prevent future occurrences in Chapter 4 of Behind the Facade, How to Structure Company Operations for Sustainable Success. Her story might convince you even more of the need for a data privacy program. Visit behindthefacadebook.com or go to Amazon to get your copy today. And we're back with Jodi Daniels. Jodi, before the break, we were both kind of sharing examples with each other of how, these pixels are out there and they can follow you, and eventually it's like it's digital stalking, and eventually these profiles are created of you, and before you know it, you start receiving all of these different advertisements, regardless of where you are online. But I love the fact that you were saying that the one thing that we need to know about data privacy is the fact that privacy is not just about data protection, but it's also about the use and collection of data. Can you share some resources with us where we can learn more about data privacy?
Sure. There's a variety of different places. There's so much. So many law firms have all kinds of information out there. If you really want to go knee deep into GDPR, my recommendation is the UK's data protection regulator. So kind of like in the United States, we have attorney generals or insurance commissioners, and you would go to them for specific needs. Data privacy has data protection regulators in each of the EU countries, and in the UK, it's called the ICO, Information Commissioner Office. They do a fabulous job with oodles of resources, especially for small businesses. There's like the big section, and then they have a dedicated small business section. So for anyone who really wants to learn more about GDPR, I highly recommend the ICO. It's ico.org/UK, I think. Make sure you Google that first. At my website, there's also oodles of information on GDPR and CCPA as well. And for cybersecurity information, there's a wealth of knowledge. There's, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. There's a quick Google search would probably be able to find, and I apologize for not having it handy. There's a national Cyber Day. October is actually Cybersecurity Month, where there's often a fair amount of information. So if you let's see, staysafeonline.org. That is the one I was looking for.
Okay.
So they have a fair amount of information that is kind of a good starting point, I think, for getting started. The FTC also has some information for setting up privacy notices and kind of privacy overall. So that's might be another example. And for privacy, if you really like what you're talking about, the Privacy Association is another one, and it's the Information Association of Privacy Professionals. And there is a security one as well. I would recommend, I think it's CIS Online, but that did not work in my quick Google search. But I think those would be my good starting places. That was kind of a lot of information.
No, this is great, and the more the merrier, honestly, because these are resources that you've clearly already vetted and that you can vouch for. As far as tools, that's the one thing we didn't capture, but if we could quickly kind of talk about things. I know there are things like VPNs, and you mentioned earlier encryption. There's remote data backup services. Can you speak really quickly about some of the different tools that we can use as small business owners that are relatively affordable options that we can look into to actually protect our company data?
Yeah, so there's, for starters, if you're saving everything to your hard drive, I highly recommend you pick a cloud provider, a Dropbox, a Box.com. They're not foolproof, but what it does do is minimize the amount of personal data you have locally to your machine. So I also highly recommend encrypting your laptop, and really a quick Google search will find a tutorial on how you can encrypt your laptop. Setting up strong passwords is another one. So I use Lastpass. You can set up your password, and then you don't have to remember the 4,000 passwords and write them on a sticky note on your computer. Not really the best idea. So the other benefit of LastPass is you can share LastPass or access to an account with someone. So let's say you're doing social media advertising. Instead of handing over your password to your ad agency or your freelancer, you can share access, via LastPass. And that's really helpful. A lot of times people use the same password because they can't remember the password. So LastPass will help you, A, create a strong password, and B, share them very successfully. There are a variety of different VPN tools that are out there, and I also would recommend those. I think Norton is one, but there's oodles of sort of small business VPN, and on specifically on my site, there's like a top 10 security list that is easy to grab as well. We could use that maybe as a reference in the show notes.
Sure.
But some other ones would be, let's see, password, scanning software. You really want to make sure that your computer has some type of a scanning software on it. I use one called Avast, A-V-A-S-T.
Yes.
Where it's going to be scanning all the time for what I have on my computer. CyberGhost VPN.
Yes, that's the one that I use. I really like it.
So CyberGhost is one. There's another one that I had just come across. And then another big one is two-factor authentication.
Yes.
So you're seeing this more and more. In fact, I use Microsoft Exchange email. I think I'm one of the small businesses that does not use Google. But Microsoft is actually implementing two-factor authentication for its own email. You can have two-factor authentication for Google, for LinkedIn. I use Xero for my accounting software. I have two-factor authentication there, for Facebook, for financial accounts, and so many others. So you really want to, I highly recommend that you do that as well. Oh, and it was not Norton VPN. I was close. It's Nord, N-O-R-D.
Yes. Okay.
It's in my head.
And I've seen that advertised on so many different YouTubers that I follow. Nord actually sponsors their videos. So yes, I am very.
All of those would be really great starting points. For all businesses, they're using that. You hear a lot of things around firewalls and network security. For a really small business, you might not even have a network, so there wouldn't be a lot of network security. You might not have databases in an area to even have a firewall in. It really, again, kind of just depends on the scope of your small business. I know some 2-people startups that have that, and I know 20-person, 50-person companies that never need that because they really don't operate that way. They rely very, very, very differently. So those would be my tools that you can easily go get out of the gate.
And this is why it's so important to have a conversation with a person like you, a privacy consultant, because you can guide us through based on our specific business and our specific business's needs and the type of data that we're collecting. You would be able to actually tell us exactly what we need. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say that. And now, what the other things I would offer is all those tools would be very much on the security side. And I started this conversation saying privacy is not only security. So some of the other places that you're going to want to pay attention to would be, I imagine everyone listening to this call does a lot of email marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Look at your stats, and a lot of the programs will kind of use like cold subscribers, and that's relevant and different for every business. For some, it might be once a week, it might be once a month, it might be once every 5 years. It just really depends on the cadence of what you're offering to your customers. But do you export those on Excel lists? Do you share those? You really want to manage what you're doing with those different email marketing lists. There's a variety of options in all these tools to help you purge lists, to help you be GDPR compliant. Depending on the email platform you're using will differ on what you need to be doing. So there's a lot of complexity, especially in the email marketing place. Some people listening might be doing Facebook retargeting with an email. So meaning they take Jody Daniels, they upload me into Facebook, then Facebook sends me a targeted message. Well, think about if I opt out of their email, but you still have me in the Facebook targeting system, that's a bit of a disconnect from a privacy standpoint. So you'd want to make sure that you go in and separate those two out. Meaning if Jody says I want to opt out of the email list, you remember where else am I in the process, and you would take me out. And you would remember that because back at that data inventory that we talked about, you would identify, oh, this is all the data and this is how I use it. And so that's where you can start making the connections with what you need to do from a privacy perspective. It really all does start with that data inventory.
Wow, I knew this would happen, Jody. I knew there was no way we would be able to pack all of this great information into 30 minutes, but this has been absolutely wonderful, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to come and speak with us today about data privacy and wow, all of the different things that we have to take into consideration. How can people get in touch with you if they want to receive some type of an assessment or consultation from you?
Sure. So you can just find me at redcloveradvisors.com. You can also find Red Clover Advisors on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And personally, I am Jody Hoffman Daniels over on LinkedIn. So really easy to find.
Thank you so much, Jody. Just hang on the line for a second. I'm going to do a quick wrap up, but thank you again for being on the show and sharing this vast amount of really valuable information. I really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on the show and really talk about such an important topic. Thank you.
Absolutely. So now that we have heard from Jody, I'm sure your thoughts, like mine, are just racing right now about data privacy. The one thing that keeps coming to mind for me is I need to go back and look at all of these customer contracts that I have and figuring out how to beef up the language that I have around data privacy. We didn't share this information with you today to scare you. It's really more about informing you so that you are aware. We say this all the time through my businessinfrastructure.tv site. You don't know what you don't know. Well, now Jody has told us, she's given us an excellent primer on what we need to know about data privacy. As a reminder, she said that the one thing we need to keep in mind about it is that privacy is not just about data protection. It's also about how we use and collect information and data on our customers and clients, as well as our vendors, freelancers, independent contractors, employees. Not only is this important to your customers, it's also, again, important to the people who are working with you behind the scenes internally, your your employees and your vendors, as well as your investors. I thought that was really important when Jody pointed out if you start growing your company, and let's say you need some type of infusion of capital, your investors will take a hard look at your data privacy program and whether or not you have one in place. Even if you don't sell data, this still applies to you. Jody also mentioned that security and privacy is just yet another risk that we need to take into consideration as we start planning out our different business activities. She did an excellent job of really explaining to us what GDPR as well as CCPA is. Definitely go and take a look at that. We'll be sure to have links to all of that information in our show notes. She also mentioned the fact that anonymity online really isn't a thing anymore because with things like cookies and pixels, it's actually tracking our online activity and can stitch together things that we've shared about ourselves as well as our browsing history, our purchasing patterns, and from there it can actually create these online profiles of us. Jody also mentioned that privacy laws are starting to pop up all around the world. And it's not just a fad, it is a growing trend, and it is here to stay. Lastly, I just want to leave you with this one nugget of advice, and this comes directly from Jody and her company, Red Clover Advisors. One of the best ways to earn trust with your customers and clients is to let them know how you are protecting their data. If you want to know more about data privacy and possibly get Jody's assistance in getting that data inventory that she mentioned in place, definitely reach out to her. Her website, again, is redcloveradvisors.com. And you can also find Jody on LinkedIn and Facebook. As a reminder, we will have links to all of these resources that she shared in the show notes at businessinfrastructure.tv. When you get to businessinfrastructure.tv, you'll also notice that we'll have a link to a new YouTube channel. If you subscribe to that channel and click on the notification bell, you'll know exactly when the next episode of this podcast will air. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, stay focused, be encouraged. This entrepreneurial journey is a marathon and not a sprint. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues with Alicia Butler-Pierre. If you like what you've heard, do us a favor and subscribe, leave a rating and review, and more importantly, share with your colleagues and team members who could benefit from the information. Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with Alicia Butler-Pierre.